Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. This is part 2 of a very ambitious project of mine. I'm trying to really deal with the roots of anti-Semitism because it hurts everyone, not just Jews, non-Jews, everyone else, as all aspects of racism do. I mean, prejudice and slavery didn't just hurt Africans, it also hurt the slaveholders. And there's an effect of karma. The first teacher that brought this to my attention, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, said that when you inherit wealth, you also inherit the energy of how that wealth was acquired. So I think it's of note that a lot of the great fortunes in the world were made from extraordinary hardships and suffering. Opium, I think in China the life was so bad that people got so easily addicted to opium. The Emperor of China wrote a letter begging the British to stop bringing the opium into China, and it seems as though the people who had the British East India Company never let Queen Victoria see these letters because she was rather moral and probably wouldn't have wanted that to have happened. And so this is another instance where the leaders may not necessarily understand the manipulations of certain powers that are going on behind the figurehead. And I think we should keep this in mind today. A lot of people have so much hatred and so much desire for punishment, and they want blood, and they want, take them to jail. And even Nico Haupt, God bless him, thinks that he doesn't believe in the death penalty because he thinks some crimes are so bad that would be too easy. But I think it's important to take a look at that kind of thinking, because I don't think that is going to get us into the new realities that our technology, rightly understood, our relationship with our machines, rightly understood, can help us to achieve, so that we can move into, as Harold Channer says, what we can't even fathom today. If we could fathom it, it would be an old reality, a usual reality. This isn't just a zero-sum game, but it's understanding enormous power. And this enormous power, as I pointed out yesterday, is expressed as that aspect of the divine feminine, or what moves into manifestation through the 5 elements, the physical aspect of the divine, as Kali. And she's the one with the long tongue, because in battle she could lick up the blood of the demons that otherwise would go into the earth and produce more demons, showing us again an analogy that violence begets violence. So this doesn't mean that the spiritual path means, oh, violence begets violence, I can't handle even looking at it, it's ruining my buzz. And so for that reason, I went down to the New York Library, and I'm starting to check out DVDs to see if I can gain command of that which is so horrifying people don't want to look at, and thus move on. Now, this is part 2 of my apology for taking down my commentary on some Howard Stern material that was so outrageous even to hear it, but I had the extraordinary privilege of being able to view it. And unless I get editing skills that can do a little mosaic deal over the penis, I saw the very penis of the fellow that used to call in and punk my shows when I had a weekly show. So for any of you producers out there who are really, really bummed out about having your shows punked by Howard Stern, well, connect with me, Rabbit Hole Central at earthlink.net. I'll put you on the private viewer list, and you can take a look at it. So another DVD that I had been very enthusiastic about, and I had it several years ago, oh my gosh, time is going on, when I had a weekly show, and that is The Architecture of Doom. I checked this out at the New York Public Library. I'd highly encourage you to do this. It's a wonderful thing about being a New York resident. You don't have to go to Blockbuster and all those places. God bless them. I know they're going out of business because everything is going to the internet. But for those of us who are struggling to pay our rent, being that most Americans live 2 paychecks away from being thrown out on the street, or they'd like to throw a couple dollars to the Concordia Foundation, I highly encourage you to go to the New York Public Library and avail yourself of some tremendous information. What I'm going to go through today is more about the Nazis' rise to power and how art played a part of that, how extraordinary idealism played a part of it, how people probably initially well-meaning, by people initially well-meaning, I mean many of the people here in New York that were part of the Eugenics Society. It had a meeting at the Natural History Museum. I can't remember the exact dates. I can look it up in Webster Tarpley's unauthorized biography of George Bush Sr. and get those exact dates. But the inspiration for the Nazis very much came from this country. They were even looking to California for principles of the legalities of doing away with either lobotomizing or totally killing people who were considered imbeciles or low IQ. California seems to have rushed people through the system with as little due process as possible. Even the Nazis had more due process than we did. Again, because we're the victor, this type of history is buried. So I want to continue on because I want to show what a delicate line Howard Stern and his people must be walking, because this kind of thing can go out through the internet and it can be picked up by those rabid fundamentalist organizations. And you don't even have to be actually a rabid fundamentalist to be a little bit horrified by the antic that he and this other lady, her name slips my mind, who's a media comedian, were up to. But I think with a lot of input and energy from you, the viewer, you can begin to see that on one hand, you've got to grab the attention of people who probably are the product of an educational system that doesn't encourage a lot of critical thinking, more encourages the passive ingesting of a lot of facts. And unfortunately, I think even a lot of our doctors are the product of this type of training. And I do want, for the sake of somebody who sent me $25, I think they were trying to encourage me to go in the direction more about my mammogram drama. And I will do that, but believe me, if this was hard to sit down and do, that's a topic I've got to give a lot of careful consideration to. By no means do I want to be giving medical advice, but I do want to be giving that kind of get up and go that you need to start investigating the types of therapies that you're taking, so that you're very wise and savvy about it. And that takes quite a bit of energy to doing, and I've just picked up another job at, a job, because I'm not paid for public access. I'm so sorry that you guys are paying $50 a month for this, but I want you to know that none of us producers get any of that. And part of that's good. It means that you don't have people taking advantage of the system. But when you're really, really following your dream, it can be very demanding. But in any case, I happily am getting $15 an hour at the Village Scandal. And that is about 3 times more than minimum wage. But I definitely need to get other little video jobs going to keep my place here in Gramercy Park. And more than that, I want to create a platform where we can widen the scope of the Concordia Foundation. I want to work with Nico Haupt. You know, he went and called up those companies that the 9/11 Truth Movement doesn't even want to acknowledge exist, the creators of these directed energy weapons. I want to call them and see if we can at least get some kind of matching fund thing going, so that each viewer out there who can take it out of their budget, and I know money's tight, to send $25 our way, maybe we can start to amass that and match it. I mean, I even had a thoughtful comment from Amy Goodman's people, or somebody that seems to know a lot about what's going on, indicating that she's a little bit tied too in how much she can do as far as delving into 9/11 truth, because if she too much crosses the Bush administration, it threatens 10 years of work that she's done. So that means it's very important that for those who are following democracy now and are very attracted to Amy's work, that you support it. And if you do send money to her, you know, send it along with something saying, I want to hear more of 9/11 truth. Then at the end of the day, when they sort of balance out what they're getting from the Ford Foundation and what they're getting from the viewer, they can see that maybe they can start to take a risk and lean over more to the viewer, you know, and let go of that Ford Foundation grant if it is dependent on not doing 9/11 truth. I don't know. This is what I've heard. I've never gotten any of those kind of grants. I've had a few people who I was involved with in the past in the Concordia Foundation, probably when a lot of hopes were running high about what we would achieve with this telecommunications investment in China, that would maybe give $3,000, something like that, that we could carry on our work with. And, you know, as much as you've seen on YouTube, as much as you've seen on MNN, we have hundreds of interviews that we've done with very fascinating people all around the world, mostly those that are spiritually inclined, but I don't want to go too far afield. Just to say, the reason I'm doing this is it shows that great artists in Germany in the 20s and 30s, work was interpreted in such a way that it was looked upon to be degenerate. How much more so could this be looked upon by fundamentalist groups overseas as an expression of the height of degeneracy of this culture, and therefore we deserve to be nuked or whatever it is. And mind you, a lot of these groups are funded by our very own CIA, or according to Nico Haupt, even the CIA's infiltrated. But I want to see if we can get these weapons companies to be thoughtful, to set aside some energy, to be matched by viewers. For sure, they've got to see some indication that you care, so we can start to study violence, and we can work our way out of destroying ourselves with these weapons and work into a better reality. So here we go, carrying on with what was attracting the Nazis.
Pedantically drawn watercolors in the style of postcards.
This is Hitler's work. He did these drawings.
Oh, how I'd love to stay here working with art, he declares from his retreat shortly before war breaks out. He's an artist, not a politician. And as soon as...
He's also, I think, a quintessential patsy, too. Not that he's not responsible for what he did. For sure he was a monster, but we must get it in perspective so we can understand the nature of the patsies that we have today and not let them do it.
War is over, he will retire and devote himself to art. At 18, Hitler had unsuccessfully applied to the Academy of Art in Vienna. Refusal was a hard blow, but he hid his disappointment. Instead of returning to his home in Linz, he remained in Vienna. He drifts around Vienna, goes to the opera, paints a little. Occasionally he devotes himself to some far-fetched...
And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, the economy was so bad, the inflation was 1 trillion to 1. If you had 1 trillion Deutschmarks at the end of World War I, by the time the inflation took its toll, those 1 trillion Deutschmarks would be worth 1 mark. So you can imagine the kind of struggling that was going on.
Project. He and his childhood friend, August Kubitschek, make an amateurish effort based on an idea that Richard Wagner abandoned, to write an opera together.
I just have to pause it here again. So you can imagine if there is such a thing as manufacturing consent, or sort of creating a distraction so that those with power and know what's really going on can continue with their malfeasance against all of society, which I said goes directly against the highest power that you can achieve, the highest divine connection that you can make, because you're not serving humanity. You're not serving society. In ancient Greek times, when they started democracy, it was just a beginning. It was a first step. Yes, women were not involved. Yes, slaves were not involved. But they also had a model, probably of what they inherited from the Egyptians, that immortality could be achieved, but only in service to the state. So what I'm saying is, as Hitler is going around and times are so tough and he's a frustrated artist, and later on you're going to see the great art that he will call decadent, and you can see why part of the chip on his shoulder was fueled along because of his not being recognized. And again in Kashmir, when I spoke to the journalism department, to the students, the professors said they had no idea that this fanatical faction would take over the university. But it's because the fanatical faction is sort of a patsy. There's other powers going on underneath it. So that's why you have to be very attentive and alert to what's happening. So back to Hitler's art.
3 years earlier, he and Kubitschek have had a decisive opera experience. And at the theater in Linz, they have seen Wagner's opera, Rienzi.
Okay, I have to pause it here. Anybody out there like Wagner? Anybody cop to it today that they like Wagner? Now, I was so lucky to have had a great teacher, Jean Klein, and he told me all spiritual practice is conditioning. You will intensify the very ego that you want to get beyond because you go, ooh, look at me. I did this spiritual practice. So his method, so to speak, was to take me and Vincenzo to the museums, to concerts, and to introduce harmony into the being. And if you have harmony, you start to see other things. And I'm kind of excited about my study about the Holocaust and so on, because I can see, having lived through that, when I knew him, he was probably in his 80s, and he had come from Bohemia, I think, in the 20s to Paris. And that was just the most cosmopolitan city and artistic with writers and so on, and that's where he was inclined. So I can see now, as I'm starting to learn more through 9/11 Truth about this, not really a shadowy government, but things not being what they seem. He never wanted to give a lot of energy to what happened with the Holocaust. But at the same time, he was very much involved with saving people who looked like they might be going into the concentration camps, and these were not exclusively Jews. So he liked opera, and he liked German opera as much as Italian opera, and he was very thoughtful in his comments. And I remember being in Versailles and going to a Wagner opera, and at first when you hear it, it's just so excessive, it's just so over the top, and it's like almost embarrassing. And then all of a sudden something goes click, and it gets you into a zone. Now, I don't think you have to run away from that any more than I would say to run away from the kind of blessings that teachers like this can bestow. But understand these traditions and understand the energy and what's happening, so that you're not like Jean used to say, Jean Klein, my teacher, that samadhi was like a sweet given to a disciple. You don't want to get strung out on sugar. So I think that Webster Tarpley is excessive when he just wants to throw out Wagner altogether. And that's why Allen says that Plato made a mistake, why the artists were not included in the Republic, in the ideal society. I'm feeling it's because Plato understood that artists could lull people into an artificial notion about what was going on. But that doesn't mean that you throw out the art and the beauty. So back to Hitler's art and his inspiration.
The opera is set in medieval Rome. Rienzi, the people's spokesman, rises against the aristocracy. He wants to turn the clock back 15 centuries and re-establish the Roman Republic of antiquity. In that spirit, He lets himself be made tribune of the people. But Rienzi falls victim to...
Now here about where Hitler wanted to turn the clock back. If I could just get this charity off the ground, I could get Webster to, you know, to get some of the money that he needs to make ends meet, because he's so desperately concerned about, you know, the annihilation and the brink of, you know, species annihilation. But if he could make ends meet and he could be paid some decent amount, we could start to put his attention on areas of our history that I feel would throw so much constructive light into understanding how we operate and understanding how leaders who have caused so much devastation, how they were suffering from some type of cultism. By cult, I mean some part of knowledge, but not the totality. That's why generally you'll see that people in cults can have some good hit off the energy of whoever the leader was, but can they themselves demonstrate the very miracles or the power? That's an entirely another question. So I'm saying that the Nazis was an example of a type of cult. It was a part of knowledge. It gave some solace at a time when people were suffering greatly, but if we can face this suffering straight on, we can make our way to a better outcome. So was Adolf Hitler misinformed about what really happened in Roman and classical times?
He fights his last battle in the capital as it crashes, burning around him. Hitler is deeply moved by Rienzi. Overwhelmed, he outlines for Kubitschek his plans for his own future and that of his people. Later he would say, "It was in that hour it all began." This experience cemented 3 fixations in Hitler that would never lose their grip on him. His fixations on Linz, his home city, on antiquity, and on Wagner. Whoever would understand Nazism must first know Wagner, said Hitler. And indeed, Wagner occupied a special place in Hitler's imagination. Wagner's political tracks were early favorites of Hitler's. Already in Linz, he had fantasized over his own operas, so extravagant as to eclipse Wagner's works. It was opera's scenic possibilities that fascinated Hitler, the fantastic illusion, the flight from reality.
Now at this point, I want to say a lot of people might think that 0-point energy is a flight from reality. So I think we have to tread very, very carefully here, because when we do want to take on divine energies, divine powers, or even, I must say, the Howard Stern guy, there was something slightly, well actually, a little bit horrifying, because I'd always wondered about pedophilia. How could people do that to children? But again, it's this lust for innocence and for power. And the problem with pedophilia is that you rob the innocence of a child. You introduce an energy that the nervous system isn't yet developed enough to handle in such a way that they can incorporate this sexual, powerful sexual energy into their lives in such a way that they're very abundant and creative with it. In other words, not just sort of hooked into these cliques. And I think what Nico Haupt was saying is that when people aren't coming forward on 9/11 truth, it may be because of a sexual secret. In the case of the wealthy who are not worried about losing their job. And in the case of this sexual shame that's running, it's very important to go into these areas and heal it, because if you don't, what you're doing by saying this is an unacceptable path, then you're automatically reinforcing anybody that has these types of sexual aberrations is going to feel even more shame. And you're blocking the energy of healing off from them. And So like what Nico was saying, some people may have been introduced into this homosexuality. I don't know what you call it, pedophilia. You know, they got assaulted when they were young, and maybe the pleasure centers do turn on, and then that starts to be their erotic standard, so that then these people form their little clubs and groups, and if someone needs favor from someone, then they'll, you know, they sort of share this secret, and they're inclined to do it. And that's why Nico Haupt feels certain aspects of 9/11 truth never get investigated very deeply, because those that want to block the investigation sort of hold them because of these sexual secrets. But just like Kali came in with a big long tongue licking up all the blood, what I'm saying is we can preempt the power of these sexual secrets by just coming out and talking about it and saying, you know what, that's what happens. How many normal people who have, you know, just regular relationships, and they're paying their mortgage and they got their kids in school, what are the fantasies that are going on when you're making love to your spouse? I mean, thoughts count. Believe me, that's what spiritual practice is all about, is understanding your thinking so that you can channel more energy into your body, and then through your body throughout the society that you're trying to bless, or to bring your soul into, and to bring experience of to your soul, so that this human drama is more meaningful. So we'll carry on again with Wagner. Oh yeah, I knew I got off track. Okay, so we all know Wagner was an anti-Semite, but do we really understand what that means and who was doing what? If there's problems that are arising and the economy is getting bad, then those who are banding together with the spiritual practice, and that's what, for those who study the great work or who have any familiarity with the ROMP, the School of Enlightenment, and I'm sure this model would appear in other schools also. The reason you want to have children is if you don't pull it off in this lifetime, you can continue the momentum of your spiritual practice, whatever karma that you took on to teach your soul a lesson, but you got caught in that lesson, you didn't complete it, you didn't own the experience, you know, you didn't forgive the other woman. You know, it's easy to talk about forgiveness, but when you're right in the throes of it, it's a more difficult thing. So if you didn't pull it off, you didn't finish it, the momentum of your spiritual practice, which is, I've come to the conclusion, a high degree of conditioning. And in a way, the body is conditioning, that the traditions that we inherit, whatever our religious preference, our default mode is, it's in our body, we've inherited it. We want to carry through with it so we can transcend it. We don't. The problem of the New Age, and almost all New Agers talk about the problem of the New Age, and how to deal with this lack of focus and commitment. But the old seems so brutal that for the sake of being a chosen people, it means you're smarter or you're better than the other. As soon as you have a chosen people, then you're going to have the master race, and we all know where that goes. But can we embrace our conditioning in such a way that we can transcend it? So I'm saying, if Wagner was an anti-Semite, let's understand exactly why, and what I'm thinking, my intuition is they were scapegoating a group that they couldn't as easily hold because of the mischief that was going on in the Christian churches and the Catholic churches, because I am certain that those popes were not able to raise the dead. And so if they can take people away from where maybe they will find the juice that they need to get the healings that they want, if they can distract them from that, then they can keep their grip on people and sort of give them much less of the power than what a careful scrutiny would indicate is there and could be acquired. So, I like Wagner.
Artist
Let's
and
go on.
politician in one person. Hitler borrowed Wagner's props: anti-Semitism, the cult of a Nordic legacy, the myth of pure blood. All gave counter to Hitler's worldview. From Wagner, too, came the notions of art as the basis of a new civilization. And the artist's print.
Well, it looks like I ran over, but at least you'll see this on YouTube. I can post it on MNN to go over to YouTube to see the rest. I guess stay tuned for part 3, because I haven't even gotten up to the part of the art that was considered so offensive, and most of the artists were Jewish. And believe me, I'm certain at the time, the crowds that they were hanging with, they probably had no idea how their art would be misunderstood. So thank you for joining me. My name is paulagloria, and this has been an excursion farther down the rabbit hole here at rabbitholecentral.tv. Bye.